As motion designers, we have the power to control time, at least time in our animations and our motion. And as UX motion designers, we have the opportunity to affect time in the real world, at least in the realm of latency. Every app, program, website in the world has some sort of latency. It may be 50 milliseconds, it may be 3 seconds, it may be several minutes of latency. And as motion designers, we actually have the power to control the way that a user perceives that latency. Sometimes that 3 seconds can feel super slow. Sometimes that 3 seconds can feel super fast. Let me show you a few tricks to speeding up the perceived latency in your experiences. Let's dive in. Inside of Figma, I've mocked up this photo gallery app. And in here, there's a little bit of latency when we actually tap on this animals album and before we get all these results. And so we, as motion designers, have an opportunity to figure out what happens in this in-between screen, right? We're gonna have to wait somewhere. The latency is gonna be around 3 seconds. How can we make that feel as fast as possible for our users? Let me dive into a few different tricks that we can use to reduce that perceived latency. Whenever approaching a problem like this, it is always important to establish the baseline. If we didn't do anything as a motion designer, what would that experience look like? And it would look something like this. We tap on it, and we wait, and finally our content is there. And let me just go ahead and replay that. So we tap on the album, and we just wait. And we're waiting about 3.5 seconds here. And it feels like a long time. So how can we actually shorten that amount of time? There's a lot of great research-backed and tested methods to reducing perceived latency. And the opportunity as motion designers that we have is really, how do we fill up this blank space? This whole 3 seconds that we have here where we're just looking at nothing. To the user, they could think, did the app crash? Am I ever gonna see my pictures? I'm just gonna close this app and go find something else. This is not worth my time. We are really accustomed to fast, reactive, responsive experiences. And so whenever we experience latency like this, we need to let the user know, hey, it's coming and it might take a little bit of time. Or, hey, be entertained while you wait to make this time feel a little bit faster. We also have the opportunity to change where that latency is sometimes, depending on the platform and the engineers and developers you're working with. Maybe it's really when we tap on the album right here. Maybe there's something that happens on this screen and we don't actually go to the gallery until it's fully loaded. That's also an option. And so you can look at this problem from many different ways, but for this scenario specifically, we immediately transition to the gallery page, and then we just have to wait 3 seconds. One way to approach this that is better than this, maybe not the best, but it's better than this, is having some sort of loading indicator on this page so that the user knows something maybe is happening. So to do that, I have this very simple spinner right here. And what we're gonna do is make sure that this spinner shows up once we're on this page and see how that feels after 3 seconds. So we're gonna go ahead and just have this rotate in a circle every 1 second. Let's see what that feels like. That's pretty good. And we can put on here a loop out expression. So if we do loop out, it will then rotate continuously. We can make it a little bit more interesting by adding some easing to this. What is interesting and always worth testing when you are doing this for an actual app or website or experience is there's an opportunity to test like what easings feel faster or feel like they're more work or more effort in the way that it moves. Like, is it actually better to have a linear easing here because you kind of just lose track of how many times it's gone around? And maybe that feels faster to some people, maybe it feels slower to others. All right, let's see. Got this loader coming in. Boom. So the question is, does this feel better and faster than what we have in our baseline? Let's look. I would say absolutely. There's something that is happening in this white space, so it makes me feel that it is actually working on something. I can trust a little bit more that the app maybe has not crashed yet. Maybe if this is going on for 10 seconds, maybe at that point I'm starting to get concerned. The app has crashed. I'm gonna kill the app, open it back up, and see if it's faster this second time. But I think this is better than what we have on our baseline. So at this point we ask, is this enough to solve our problem, or is there actually more we can do to further reduce that perceived latency? And I think there is. This next method is using skeleton UI or ghost loaders or skeleton loaders. It goes by many different names. but it basically gives more of an idea of what the future screen will look like. And so by the time it's loaded, you're already oriented a little bit more to what's going to be coming. And that's a little bit more interesting than an indeterminate spinner just going around and around and around. So let's see how we can make this a little bit more interesting. So we're going to go ahead and take our skeleton UI asset comp and drop it right in here. And we're going to give it the same fading as we have over here. Oh, it is. All right, so we've dropped in our skeleton UI asset comp, and we're actually gonna remove the names and things for now. And so after we tap on it, this fades in, and then we reveal our images. Okay, maybe a little crossfade here is helpful. Let's see how this feels. So I'm not quite sure if this feels better than the spinner that we had. Because the spinner, it looks like something is moving the whole time, so it feels like it's working. Where this one, we're just revealing the skeleton UI, nothing else is happening, and then it's disappearing. Still during this time, nothing is visually happening, except for it fading in, and then it's just static the whole way through. And so the skeleton UI still isn't really doing what we need it to do. So how can we make it a little bit better? Let's go ahead and click into this comp, and here we have the skeleton UI comp here. And what we want to do is give it kind of an opacity pulsing in and out, so that we have some sort of motion happening while we're waiting. So we're going to do a opacity keyframe maybe we'll do it for 30 seconds. It'll go down to maybe 50. And then after 30 seconds again, it will go back up to 100. Let's see what that feels like. All right, and we will do the same looping trick where we'll do loop out, and that will loop forever. And let's see. Okay, and we're just using linear keyframes right there. Let's check this out. Now let's take a look at our skeleton UI. So we tap it, this fades in. That's interesting. We get to see a little foreshadowing of what that future layout is going to look like. And we have some motion happening because things are pulsing, and it's nice. But I still think it could be better. It's kind of a lot having this big block of gray just like coming in and out and in and out. Maybe there's a way that we can make all of these squares feel like individual elements rather than one big grouping of things. Let's go ahead and remove the fade from there. And let's actually go in here and apply an opacity fade to each one of these blocks and offset them a little bit. So then we're gonna have this like cascading effect all the way down. So what we're gonna do here is have a slow fade over 30 seconds. And then after that, it's going to pulse. So we're going to do 50 and then back to 100. And we'll just duplicate that for the end of time. And if we want to, we could add a subtle easing in and out to that. Let's go ahead and copy that to all the other rectangles and select all the layers. And we're just going to offset them. We can use this great free plugin called Rift to do just that. And if we do this a few times, let's take a look. So this gives a nice cascading effect for all of these different elements. And now let's go back here and let's see how this is feeling. And we can actually remove our opacity fade in because each one of those boxes individually is going to be fading in. Let's check it out. So we tap on the album, and then we have all these things fade in, and then we have the images come in. This is really, really nice because we have a lot of things going on. We have a lot to look at. This is taking a good bit of time to actually build this animation in. So from here to here, about a second passes where we're actually like seeing everything build. And then we're only staying on this screen for another maybe 2 seconds before we actually resolve to the images. Another way to further reduce the perceived latency here is you could actually stretch that intro build animation to be maybe 1.5 seconds, 2 seconds, so that all these little blocks are coming on a little bit slower. Maybe you stretch out the fade in and fade out. Instead of 30 seconds, maybe it's a second each. Since the animation is not being repeated as often, it feels maybe a little bit faster because you haven't seen it as many times before you're actually getting your content. And so these are all a bunch of different variables that you can use to experiment with what is the fastest feeling loading animation, essentially. All right, let's see how we can make the skeleton UI even better. And we'll name this even better. All right. So we have this animation here, and then all the pictures just appear on the page. Okay, there's maybe some information that we don't need to load. And so it's always great in these types of motion problem solving is to be very aware of what you can have access to and what you do not have access to as far as the app experience working with your developers and your engineers. And so one thing that I assume that we could have access to is the name and the dates. That is probably something that we already know from this point. And so is there a way that we could already have that information, or maybe that information only takes like 50 milliseconds to load? That would make this page feel a lot more finished and a lot closer to that finish line. So let's go ahead and go into our skeleton UI assets. And we're actually going to turn on these. So we already have those in here, and we just need a good fade for these. And so we're going to just copy over the opacity fade from that, the opacity fade from that, and the opacity fade from that. So that as this whole page comes on, the dates come with it. And so now we have like concrete information that helps anchor the skeleton UI loading. So it doesn't feel as generic and ambiguous. It's a little bit more clear what's going on here. So that's really helpful. Another thing that would be great is, as we're looking at the skeleton UI, is that all the images just appear all at once. Maybe after chatting with your developers or your engineers, can we load these images one at a time? And would that actually get us to content faster? Instead of waiting till all images are loaded, then reveal them, can we say, hey, if the first image is done and ready, reveal it. If the second image is done, reveal it. And just do that in order and cascade down. And so then maybe we can mimic what we have here, where we have one square appearing at a time. Maybe we can do the same thing here. And so maybe some of our images get to be loaded a little bit earlier. And even if not, does that cascading effect just help this transition and this loading moment feel a little bit more cohesive and less overwhelming? Because as motion designers, we have the power to direct the user's eye, and giving them everything all at once usually is never a good idea. And so let's create an experience for them where we unfold this gallery of images for them. So if we go into here, we actually have all these images in this comp right here. And we know that we don't need the text and we don't need any of that. All we need are all of these images here. What we want to do is just paste in the opacity that we're using with the skeleton UI. So I'll go ahead and paste that in. You see that we have it here. Still, it's all just fading in at one time, but we can use that wonderful script called Rift, and we can fade this on and cascade them. And so now if we line it up with 3.5 seconds of latency, we can see, because after that, we have this cascading loading of all those images, which feels much more cohesive with the way that we're treating the latency. Like it feels a part of the same system and the same motion, that it's kind of fading in and cascading along with the skeleton UI. So now if we go back here, we're actually going to remove this opacity fade at the end, and we're just going to remove that altogether. So let's take a look at even better skeleton UI. Because this feels much more cohesive. It feels very, very quick. It just feels like we haven't really left the app. We're not really like in this white dead space. Things are happening the whole time, and it really doesn't feel as long as it did in the very first baseline where we have nothing. It feels even faster and more interesting than just an indeterminate spinner. And overall, we've really reduced the perceived latency and made this a much more enjoyable experience for our user. And that's it, folks. Just a few simple ways to reduce perceived latency in all of your experiences by using spinners and skeleton UI, and a few different tips and tricks to really reduce the overall perceived latency. I hope this is helpful for all of you, and I'll catch y'all next time.